You know, for 2,500 years, there's been this one book that has shaped how generals, samurai, even politicians think. But what if I told you its most powerful lessons aren't really for the battlefield? What if they're for your career, your business, your everyday life? Okay, let's dive into this. We're talking about Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
And that's a totally fair question, right? How can some ancient text about chariots and sieges actually help you land a promotion or launch a new product? Well, turns out, the core principles have almost nothing to do with swords and everything to do with pure, uncut strategy. And that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
And its influence, it's just undeniable. I mean, this timeline here is just a tiny snapshot. You're looking at everything from the Napoleonic Wars to the incredibly complex deceptions of the D-Day invasion. Its principles were basically the blueprint for victory. Fast forward to Vietnam, the Viet Cong used its guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver a global superpower. And today, it's literally the playbook for CEOs and even World Cup winning coaches.
So what is it about this ancient book that gives it so much staying power? Well, it all boils down to a single, pretty radical idea, especially for a book about, war. Sun Tzu's whole philosophy is that the greatest victory is the one that requires no battle at all. It's about being so smart, so prepared, that the conflict is already over before it even starts.
This quote right here, it completely flips our whole idea of what it means to win. Sun Tzu believes that a battle is just the physical result of a victory or defeat that has already happened, back in the planning stage. The actual fighting is just the final confirmation of who did their homework. So how do you do that homework? Well, Sun Tzu actually breaks it down into this 5-step process. First, you measure the entire situation. Then you estimate the resources, both yours and your competition's. After that, you calculate all the possibilities, you balance the chances of success, and only then, after all that, is victory even on the table. This isn't just some abstract philosophy. It's a real, practical framework for any challenge you face. And this right here gets to the ultimate goal. See, it's not about crushing your opponent. It's about making your goal the path of least resistance. It's about being so clever in achieving your objectives that a direct, expensive, and messy fight becomes totally unnecessary. Okay, so let's bring this down to a really personal level. Forget armies and generals for a second and just think about your career. This is your personal battlefield, and as we're about to see, the exact same rules apply.
This is probably the most famous line from The Art of War, and for good reason. It is the absolute cornerstone of any good strategy, whether it's military or professional. Victory doesn't start with a big plan of attack, it starts with information, and just as important, self-awareness.
So what does this actually look like for you? Well, knowing yourself means being brutally honest about your skills, your weaknesses, and where you really want to go. And knowing your enemy, or let's just call it your market, means understanding trends, knowing what your competitors are up to, and most importantly, seeing where the gaps and opportunities are. Remember those steps from before? Measurement, estimation, calculation? This is where you actually do the work. Let's make this super concrete with a little modern spying. Go on LinkedIn, find someone who has the job you want. Analyze their profile, see what their strengths are. But then, look for the gaps. Maybe they're an amazing project manager, but you notice they have zero experience with the latest AI tools. Well, if you master those tools, that gap just became your golden opportunity. You've just avoided what is strong and found a weak point to strike.
All right, now let's scale this whole idea up. The exact same logic you can use for your career, a company has to use to navigate its market. Suddenly, the CEO is the general and the market is the battlefield.
Sun Tzu talks constantly about understanding the terrain. For a business, the terrain isn't mountains and rivers, it's the market itself. Our customer needs shifting. Is the economy strong or weak? Who are the big players? You simply cannot make a single strategic move without knowing the ground you're standing on.
And this all leads to something called competitive mapping. Before launching a product, a smart company maps the terrain. They ask, where are competitors strongest? That's their high ground. You stay away from that. But where are they weak? Is there a group of customers they're ignoring? A feature they haven't thought of? That's the undefended territory you attack, creating an advantage before a single marketing dollar is even spent.
Sun Tzu was obsessed with efficiency. He knew that long, dragged-out wars just drain resources, exhaust your people, and bankrupt the entire state, even if you're the one who wins. And this warning is so relevant to the business world.
Because what's the modern equivalent of a prolonged, costly war? It's a price war. It's a complete race to the bottom that just destroys profit margins and burns through a company's resources.
Yeah, sure, you might gain a little market share, but you're like a general who captures a city only to find it's been burned to the ground. What have you really won?
You know, Sun Tzu actually gives us a hierarchy for this. The lowest form of attack is to go after the armies directly, or in business to compete on price. The next best thing? Disrupt their alliances, mess with their supply chains or partnerships. But the highest, most elegant form of victory? You attack their strategy. You outthink them, you innovate, you make their entire business model obsolete without ever fighting them on their own terms.
So after this whole journey from ancient battlefields all the way to the modern boardroom, what's the actual game plan? What are the key things you need to walk away with?
Here it is. This is the strategist playbook. Number 1, calculate before you act. Do the research. 2, know yourself and the market, inside and out. 3, your goal is to win the game in the preparation phase. 4, stay away from those draining conflicts, like price wars, whenever you can. And finally, always, always remember, the greatest victory isn't won with the most force, it's won with the most intelligence.
Ultimately, Sun Tzu's wisdom isn't some manual for aggression. It's a guide to strategic thinking. It teaches us that the person, or the company, that wins isn't always the biggest or the strongest. It's the one that is the most prepared, the most knowledgeable, and, yeah, simply the smartest. And that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. Whether it's a job interview, a product launch, or even just a difficult negotiation, what's your next battle? And more importantly, how are you going to apply these principles to win it before it even begins?